I am still not feeling so great, so I am taking another day at home trying to see if I can be eating real food before I come back to you guys. And so I'm going to help you do your interactive notebook on video so that we don't get behind. So if I go too fast, if you didn't catch something, make sure to stop and rewind. I'll try to give you space in between things like we regularly do in class. But the nice thing with here is that every time you get ready to write something, just pause it and write it down, and that way you won't have to be rewinding all the time. This is our teks for today. Our objective for this week is that we will write one variable, one-step equations, and inequalities, and we're going to represent them on number lines. We're going to be covering 3 different teks this week. They're all 6th grade teks. So I'm using yellow for my verbs today. You can pick whatever color you want. If you don't have your color picked yet, then go ahead and do that before you start this. Make sure that you have your cup and everything that you need. Okay, so our first verb is write. I'm putting that in my yellow. We're going to write and we're going to represent. And then our next tek, we're going to represent. And then our last tek, we're going to write. So as you can see, the verbs are pretty easy this week. We're basically doing a lot of writing and representing. This is a brand new section of teks, and some students find inequalities really simple. Some students find them a little difficult, so I'm hoping you do really good with these. We have a lot of vocabulary words, and I'm sorry, so we don't have very many verbs, but lots of vocabulary words. Our first one is one variable, one-step equations, and then inequalities and constraints or conditions. I think you guys should know what the problems part is just fine. A lot of these words you've seen before, like one-step equations, you should be familiar with, but we're just going to go ahead and write them down today anyway. Then we're going to be representing solutions. We know what that is, but it's also for one variable, one-step equations, and inequalities. And this time we're doing it on number lines. And then our last one, we're going to be writing real-world problems with one variable, one-step equations, or inequalities. So as you can see, even though there's a lot of words, a lot of them are just repeating over and over again. So I'm going to put this right here to make sure you get a good chance to write these down. And so you might want to pause it, and then when you get it done, let's go to our next step. Okay, our first verb was write, so I'm going to put write. And I'm pretty confident that you guys know what write means, so you're not going to have to write a definition for that, but I am going to go ahead and highlight that with my verb color, so I know that that's a verb. And what are we going to write? One variable. And so a variable is something we've been talking about for a while. You use them in science, you also use them in math, and that would be like the letter X. That's when you put that into an equation and you don't know what that number is. That is a variable. Just a real simple basic definition for what we're doing right now. We may get into a more complicated one later, but basically you need to know that variable is going to be the letter that you're substituting for the number. One-step equations. That you should also know because you've been doing one-step equations for a long time. You a lot of times talk about one-step word problems. It's the same thing with one-step equations. In one-step equations, you just have one operation one time. They're a lot simpler. And then we have inequalities. And inequalities could be greater than, it could be less than, it could be greater than or equal to. It could be less than or equal to. All of those are called inequalities because they're not equal. That's pretty basic, right? Equality would be like equal. Inequality would be not equal. And what are we going to be doing with those? We're going to be representing. I'm going to highlight my represent. Remember, anytime you need to, just pause so that you can get everything copied down. Represent. And what are going to represent? Constraints or conditions. And that might be a little bit more difficult for you. Constraints is kind of a weird word. You might have heard being constrained before as like when somebody gets arrested, they put them in handcuffs, and that's constraining them. In math problems, so we're talking about constraints and conditions. It's telling us about things that we can't do. So this would be where we get to these like greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So what a constraint might look like is I have $50, so I could spend $50, I can spend less than $50, but I can't spend more than $50. So in that situation, I might say something like I can spend less than or equal to $50. My constraint is I cannot go over $50. A condition is very, very much like a constraint. So we're just going to kind of do this here for both of them. Conditions are just telling you certain things like my tickets are going to cost this much, and I can only invite up to this many people, same kind of thing. So when we're looking at conditions and constraints, it's kind of talking about the same things in problems. It's what's going to cause those inequalities. If I only have $50, I cannot spend $100 because I don't have it to spend. And if I try to buy it at the store, they're going to be very grumpy, and they're going to tell me that I'm going to have to put some things back because I don't have enough money for it. So constraints and conditions are just a way for us to represent inequalities in word problems and equations. Our next teke looks very much the same. It's also talking about representing, which we've talked about represent many times, so we know what represent means. And what are we going to be representing? We're going to represent solutions. Once again, it's for one variable, one-step equations. I didn't write down solutions because you guys have done plenty solutions. Solutions just means we have to find the answer for those, right? Sometimes for inequalities we find the answer, sometimes we don't. So we have to represent solutions for one variable, one-step equations, and inequalities. And this time, we're going to be doing it on number lines. And this can be a little tricky. So what this might look like is if I have a number line that is greater than, here's my little number line right here. So let's say it's greater than 2. I would put an open circle on the 2, and then I would make a line that goes this way. And this means this is greater than the number 2. And it's showing all these numbers could be represented on this number line, but the number 2 isn't because it's an open circle. If it was greater than or equal to 2, my number line would then look like this. Here's my 2. But now I close in my circle and my number line. And so we're going to be practicing that a lot this week. But what we need to know is if that circle is on there, it includes that number. And if the circle is open, it does not include that number. So we'll be doing a lot of that, representing them on number lines this week. The last thing we're doing is write. Oops, that says RILE. I probably should make that into a T. Write. And we're going to be writing real-world problems. We've talked about that before, that we want our problems to actually be something that makes sense. Real-world problems given one variable, one-step equations, and inequalities. So as you can see, it's just kind of repeating over and over and over again. We probably won't do a whole lot of writing problems ourselves this week, even though we may talk about them more. We'll be writing them more next week, but we'll kind of be introducing you to that, because what our tekes say is that we should be able to take a problem and when we're given this, and we should be able to make it work out to make sense. So here, in case you need them again, here's our first teke. If you didn't get everything, you can pause it right there. There's our second teke. So you can pause it right there if you need it. And there is our third teke.